The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact time because I was staring at my phone's glowing screen, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Mom never called this late. Never. "Sarah?" Her voice cracked through the speaker, barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something." I sat up in bed, my husband stirring beside me. The darkness of our bedroom suddenly felt suffocating. "Mom? What's wrong? Are you okay?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Then came the sound that would haunt me for months, a broken sob that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. "I've done something terrible, honey. Something so stupid, and I don't know what to do." To understand how my mother, a woman who had built a successful accounting practice from nothing, who had raised 3 children as a single parent after my father's death, who had always been the rock our family leaned on, could lose $2 million to a stranger on the internet, you need to understand who she was before he entered her life. At 68, Mom lived in the same colonial house where I'd grown up, surrounded by 40 years of memories. The morning sun still filtered through the kitchen window, just as it had when I was 8, casting dancing shadows across the worn hardwood floors. But now, instead of the chaos of 3 children getting ready for school, the house held only the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the soft whisper of pages turning as Mom read her morning paper. She had settled into the rhythm of widowhood with a grace that both inspired and worried me. Dad had been gone for 12 years, but his presence still lingered in the coffee mug she never moved from his spot on the kitchen counter, in the way she still slept on her side of their king-sized bed, in the gentle smile that would cross her face when she'd catch herself setting the table for 2. Mom's days had structure. Morning coffee while reading the news, tending to her garden where roses bloomed in defiant splendor, volunteer work at the local literacy center twice a week. She had friends, certainly. The book club that met monthly, her bridge group on Thursdays, church activities. But I noticed in the way that adult children begin to see their parents with clear eyes that she was lonely. It wasn't the desperate, consuming loneliness that drives people to make rash decisions. It was quieter, more insidious. It was the way she'd linger on the phone when I called, asking about my day, my husband's work, my children's school projects with an attention that suggested she was hungry for connection. It was how she'd mention, almost casually, that she'd seen a lovely couple walking hand in hand at the grocery store and how nice it must be to have someone to share the small moments with. Her financial security had always been a source of pride. Dad's life insurance, combined with the sale of their small business and decades of careful saving, had left her comfortable. She owned her home outright, had healthy retirement accounts, and had even set aside money for each of her grandchildren's college funds. She managed everything herself, maintaining the same meticulous attention to detail that had made her accounting firm successful. But what I didn't see, what none of us saw, was how that very competence had become a kind of armor that kept deeper connections at bay. She was always the one others came to for advice, for help, for stability. When had anyone last asked what she needed? When had anyone made her feel cherished rather than useful? It started, as these things often do, with something seemingly innocent. Mom had joined a few online groups, a gardening forum where she shared pictures of her prize-winning roses, a cooking group where she exchanged recipes. She was tentatively exploring social media, posting occasional photos of her garden, updates about her volunteer work. The message came through Facebook on a Wednesday evening in March. She was in her study, the room that had once been Dad's office, surrounded by his old law books and the desk where she paid bills and managed her investments. The computer screen cast a blue glow across her reading glasses as she scrolled through photos of her grandchildren that my sister had posted.
Margaret, I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I saw your comment on the community gardening group about roses, and I was struck by your knowledge and kindness. I'm new to this area and struggling with my own garden. Would you mind sharing some advice? The message was from someone named David Richardson. His profile showed a distinguished-looking man in his early 70s, silver hair carefully styled, warm brown eyes crinkling at the corners in a genuine smile. He was wearing a navy polo shirt and standing in front of what appeared to be a modest but well-maintained home with a garden that clearly needed work. Mom told me later that she stared at the message for a full 5 minutes. When was the last time someone had complimented her knowledge? When had someone reached out to her specifically, not because they needed her to solve a problem or handle a crisis, but because they were genuinely interested in something she was passionate about? Her response was careful, polite. "Hello, David. I'd be happy to help with your garden questions. Roses can be tricky, but they're so rewarding when you get them right." His reply came within an hour. "Thank you so much, Margaret. I have to admit, I'm a bit overwhelmed by all of this. I recently moved here after my wife passed away, and I'm trying to keep up with the garden she loved so much. Your roses in those photos are absolutely stunning. She would have been so impressed." Just like that, the hook was set. Not with grand gestures or obvious manipulation, but with the gentle acknowledgement of shared loss, the suggestion of a man struggling to honor his late wife's memory, and the sincere appreciation for something Mom excelled at. Over the following weeks, what began as gardening advice evolved into something deeper. David was unlike anyone Mom had encountered online. He wrote in complete sentences, with proper grammar and thoughtful observations. He asked about her day, remembered details from previous conversations, and shared stories from his own life that painted a picture of a cultured, educated man dealing with his own grief. He told her he was a retired civil engineer who had spent his career designing bridges, connecting people and places, as he put it with what seemed like genuine poetry. He spoke of his late wife, Elena, with a tenderness that made Mom's heart ache with recognition. He described how they had met in college, how she had been the more social one while he was content to let her shine at dinner parties, how he was struggling to learn to cook for one after 42 years of marriage. The conversations moved from Facebook to email, then to daily phone calls. Mom found herself looking forward to these calls, with an anticipation that surprised her. David had a way of making her feel heard, truly heard, in a way she hadn't experienced in years. "Margaret," he said, during one of their evening calls, his voice warm and slightly rough, with what sounded like emotion. "I hope you don't think I'm being too forward, but talking with you has become the best part of my day. You have such wisdom, such grace. Elena would have liked you tremendously." Mom felt something flutter in her chest. Not the desperate grab of someone starving for attention, but the gentle unfurling of a heart that had been carefully closed for over a decade. "That's very kind of you to say, David. I enjoy our conversations too. You have a way of making even ordinary things seem interesting." He laughed, and she could picture him smiling. "Perhaps that's what happens when you find someone who truly understands you. After Elena died, I thought I'd never feel that connection again. But you make me feel less alone in this world." The photo exchanges began innocently enough. David sent pictures of his garden progress, thanking her for her advice as his roses began to bloom. He shared photos of meals he'd attempted to cook, some successful, others charmingly disastrous. Mom found herself taking pictures of her own garden, her cooking, even herself, reading in her favorite chair, sharing glimpses of her life with someone who seemed genuinely interested. When he sent her a photo of himself in a crisp white shirt and tie, explaining that he'd been asked to consult on a bridge project. Mom felt a flush of something she hadn't experienced in years. He was undeniably handsome, but more than that, he looked like a man who took care of himself, who had dignity and purpose. "You look very distinguished," she wrote back, then immediately worried she'd been too forward. His response came quickly. "Thank you, dear Margaret. You know, I've been thinking about asking you something, and I hope you won't think it's too presumptuous. Would you be willing to share a photo of yourself? I feel like I know your heart from our conversations, and I'd love to put a face to the woman who's brought such light into my life."
The photo Mom sent was one my sister had taken the previous Christmas. Mom in her blue dress, her silver hair styled softly, her smile genuine and warm. She looked beautiful, confident, happy. David's response made her heart race. "Margaret, you are absolutely stunning. But more than that, I can see the kindness in your eyes, the strength in your smile. I feel like the luckiest man alive to have found you." By May, 3 months into their correspondence, David had become a constant presence in Mom's life. They spoke every morning over coffee, exchanged emails throughout the day, and had long phone conversations each evening. Mom found herself planning her days around their scheduled calls, buying new clothes for the photos she'd send, even changing her hairstyle based on a casual compliment he'd made. The shift from friendship to something deeper was so gradual that Mom didn't realize when it happened. David had a way of making her feel like she was the most fascinating woman in the world. He asked about her childhood, her dreams, her fears. He listened, really listened, to her stories about raising 3 children alone, about building her business, about the challenges of aging. "You're remarkable, Margaret," he said one evening, his voice soft with what sounded like awe. "Most people become bitter when life deals them difficult hands, but you've taken every challenge and turned it into strength. Elena used to say that real beauty comes from a life well lived. Looking at you, I understand exactly what she meant." Mom found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. Her secret fear that she'd failed as a mother because she'd been so focused on providing for us that she'd missed important moments. Her worry that she was becoming irrelevant as she aged. Her quiet terror of dying alone and forgotten. David met each vulnerability with understanding and reassurance. "Margaret, from everything you've told me about your children, it's clear you raised them to be strong, independent people. That's the greatest gift a parent can give. And as for being alone, well, I hope you know that as long as I'm breathing, you'll never be alone again." The word love entered their conversations in June. David said it first, during a phone call where Mom had been telling him about a difficult day at the literacy center. "I love how compassionate you are," he said, and the words hung in the air between them. "I love how you see the best in everyone, how you make the world a little brighter just by being in it." Mom's response was barely a whisper. "I love talking with you too, David. I love how you make me feel like myself again." "No, Margaret," he said gently. "I love you. Not just talking with you, not just the idea of you. I love you. Your laugh, your wisdom, your beautiful heart. I know it might seem impossible, falling in love with someone I've never met in person, but that's what's happened. I love you, and I want to spend whatever time I have left making you as happy as you've made me." The promises began then. Talk of meeting in person, of David visiting her, of a future together. He spoke of selling his house and moving closer to her, of traveling together, of growing old hand in hand. "I want to wake up next to you every morning," he told her during one of their late-night calls. "I want to cook breakfast for you, tend the garden with you, meet your children and grandchildren. I want to be the man who makes you smile every day for the rest of your life." Mom later admitted that she had cried after that call, not from sadness, but from a joy so overwhelming it scared her. After 12 years of believing that part of her life was over, here was someone offering her a second chance at love. The urgent request came in July, delivered with the perfect mixture of desperation and embarrassment that would become David's signature approach. Mom was in her kitchen, preparing dinner for one, as she had for over a decade, when her phone rang. "Margaret, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I don't know who else to turn to." David's voice was strained, tight with what sounded like barely controlled panic. "I've made a terrible mistake, and I need help." Mom's heart immediately went to him. "What's wrong, David?" "Whatever it is, we can figure it out together." "I'm in Nigeria," he said, and she could hear the shame in his voice. "I came here for a consulting job on a bridge project, a big one that would have set me up comfortably for retirement. But everything's gone wrong. The client is refusing to pay until I cover some unexpected permit fees, and I don't have access to my accounts here. I'm stuck, Margaret. I'm stuck in a foreign country with no money and no way to get home." The story was elaborate but believable. David explained that he'd been contracted to oversee the construction of a major bridge project in Lagos. The client was a government entity, and the project was legitimate, but bureaucratic red tape had created unexpected costs. The permit fees were $15,000, and without them, not only would he not be paid the $200,000 he was owed, but he'd be in violation of his contract. "I'm so embarrassed to ask this," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "But could you possibly help me? I'll pay you back the moment I get home, with interest. I have the money. It's just tied up in accounts I can't access from here." Mom's mind raced. $15,000 was a significant sum, but she had it. More importantly, David was in trouble, and she loved him. The thought of him stranded in a foreign country, frightened and alone, was unbearable. "Of course I'll help," she said without hesitation. "What do you need me to do?" The relief in his voice was palpable. "Oh, Margaret, I don't know what I'd do without you. I'll never forget this kindness. Never." The money transfer process was complicated, David explained, because of international banking regulations. He couldn't receive wire transfers directly, but he had an associate in the United States who could receive the money and forward it to him. Mom would need to send the money via MoneyGram to David's business partner, who would then transfer it to David's account in Nigeria. Every instinct Mom had developed over 68 years of life should have been screaming warnings. She had spent decades handling financial matters, had seen clients fall victim to various scams, knew the red flags of financial fraud. But love, it seems, has a way of silencing even the most practical voices. Standing in the MoneyGram office at her local grocery store, Mom felt a flutter of unease. The clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, asked if she was sure about the transfer. "It's a lot of money, ma'am," she said gently. "And international transfers can be risky. Do you know this person well?" Mom straightened her shoulders, feeling foolish for doubting. "He's someone very important to me," she said firmly. "He's in trouble, and I'm helping him." The transaction went through. That evening, David called, his voice thick with gratitude and love. "Margaret, you've saved my life. I'll never be able to repay you for this kindness. I love you so much, and I promise that as soon as I get home, I'm going to spend every day showing you how grateful I am." Mom went to bed that night, feeling like a heroine in a romance novel, the woman who had rescued her love from a terrible situation. She imagined David's homecoming, their first meeting, the grateful kiss that would make everything worthwhile. The second crisis came just 2 weeks later. Mom was watering her roses in the early morning, thinking about David's daily call, when her phone rang earlier than usual. "Margaret, something terrible has happened." His voice was hollow, exhausted. "I'm in the hospital."
The story spilled out in fragments. David had been in a car accident on his way to the construction site. He wasn't seriously injured, but the rental car was totaled, and the hospital was demanding payment before they would release him. Worse, his passport had been damaged in the accident, and he needed to pay for emergency replacement documents. "How much?" Mom asked, her heart breaking at the pain in his voice. "$25,000, he said quietly. "I know it's a lot, Margaret. I know I've already asked so much of you, but I don't know what else to do. I'm scared, and I'm alone, and you're the only person in the world who cares about me." The doubt that had been a whisper after the first transfer was a little louder now. $25,000 was a significant portion of Mom's savings, but David was hurt, trapped, frightened. How could she abandon him now? "I'll take care of it," she said, and meant it. This time, the money had to be sent via Bitcoin, David explained. The hospital and the embassy preferred cryptocurrency for international transactions because it was faster and more secure. Mom had never used Bitcoin before, but David walked her through the process over the phone, his voice patient and grateful. The Bitcoin exchange was confusing and intimidating. Mom sat in the parking lot of the store, phone pressed to her ear, as David guided her through creating a digital wallet, purchasing the cryptocurrency, and sending it to the address he provided. "You're doing great, sweetheart," he said, his voice warm with affection. "I know this is all new to you, but you're handling it beautifully. This is just one more obstacle, and then we'll be together. I promise you, Margaret, all of this will be worth it when I can finally hold you in my arms." The transfer went through. David called that evening to confirm he'd received the money and was being released from the hospital. "I love you so much, Margaret," he said. "You've saved me again. I don't know how I got so lucky to find someone like you." By August, the pattern was established. Every few weeks, a new crisis would arise, each one more urgent than the last, each one requiring increasingly large sums of money. The amounts escalated gradually. $35,000 when David's construction equipment was seized by customs officials, $50,000 when a business dispute required legal fees, $75,000 when a sudden illness required emergency surgery. Each time, Mom's hesitation lasted a little longer. Each time, the justifications became more elaborate. Each time, the methods of sending money became more complex and untraceable. "Margaret, I know this is getting difficult," David said during one of their calls, his voice heavy with what sounded like guilt. "I know I keep asking for your help, and I hate that I'm putting you in this position, but I'm so close to finishing this project. Once it's done, I'll be paid everything I'm owed, over $2 million, and I'll be able to pay you back every penny and take care of you for the rest of our lives." The promises became more elaborate with each request. David spoke of buying a house where they could live together, of traveling the world, of setting up trust funds for Mom's grandchildren. He painted a picture of a future so golden, so perfect, that the temporary sacrifices seemed not just reasonable, but essential. "Think of it as an investment in our future," he said, when Mom expressed concern about the amounts. "Every dollar you send brings us closer to our life together. I know it's scary, but I promise you, Margaret, I promise you on Elena's grave, that I will make this right." The red flags were impossible to ignore now, but love, or what Mom believed was love, had created its own logic. When David couldn't video call, it was because he was in a remote area with poor internet. When his phone number changed, it was because he'd had to switch to a local carrier. When his stories became inconsistent, it was because he was stressed and exhausted. Mom began hiding the transfers from her family. She moved money between accounts, liquidated investments, even took out a home equity loan to access more cash. When my sister mentioned that Mom seemed distant during family dinners, Mom explained that she was just tired. "I'm fine. she would say when we asked about her quieter demeanor. Just thinking about some changes I might make. The isolation was gradual, but complete. David had become the center of Mom's world, and she had become secretive about their relationship. She stopped mentioning him to friends, deflected questions about her online activities, and spent more and more time alone, waiting for his calls, sending his money, planning for a future that existed only in her imagination. The largest transfer came in October. David called, his voice broken with desperation. "Margaret, I don't know how to tell you this, but I've been kidnapped." The story was elaborate and terrifying. David claimed he'd been taken by criminals who had discovered he was working on a government project. They were demanding a ransom of $200,000 for his release. He was being allowed to make one phone call, and he had chosen to call her. "I'm so scared, Margaret," he whispered, his voice trembling. "These people are dangerous. They've hurt me already, and they say they'll do worse if the money isn't paid. I know it's a lot, but it's my life we're talking about. Please, if you love me, if you care about me at all, please help me." Mom was frantic. The thought of David being tortured, killed, because she couldn't raise the money was unbearable. She liquidated her retirement accounts, paid the penalty fees, and sent the money via a complex series of cryptocurrency transfers that David's kidnappers had specified. 2 weeks later, David called again. He was free, but traumatized. The kidnappers had released him, but they had also stolen his project documents and were demanding an additional $300,000 to return them. Without the documents, David couldn't prove he'd completed the bridge project, and he wouldn't be paid. "This is it, Margaret," he said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "This is the last time I'll ever ask you for help. I know I've asked for so much, and I know you've sacrificed everything for me. But this is our last obstacle. Once I get those documents back, I'll be paid, and we can finally be together." Mom didn't have $300,000. She had already given David nearly $1.8 million over the course of 8 months. But David was desperate, and she was in too deep to stop now. She took out a second mortgage on her house. The final transfer was $400,000, an additional amount David needed to pay legal fees to ensure the document return was legitimate. Mom sent the money on a cold November morning, standing in a Bitcoin exchange office, hands shaking as she completed the transaction. "Thank you, my darling," David said when she called to confirm. "Thank you for believing in me, for saving me, for loving me. I promise you, this is the end of our troubles. I'll be home soon, and we'll never be apart again." David's phone went dead on a Tuesday evening in November. Mom had been trying to reach him for 3 days, her calls going straight to voicemail, her texts unanswered. The silence was deafening after 8 months of constant communication. She told herself there were reasonable explanations. His phone had been damaged. He was in transit. He was dealing with final paperwork. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence became impossible to rationalize. Mom stopped sleeping. She would lie in bed, staring at her phone, willing it to ring. She stopped eating regular meals, lost weight, became a shadow of herself. The house that had once felt like home became a museum of her own foolishness. Every corner holding memories of conversations with David, every surface cluttered with printed emails and photos he'd sent. She began researching frantically, typing "David Richardson Nigeria Bridge Project" into Google, looking for any evidence that the man she loved was real. She found nothing. No bridge projects, no consulting contracts, no record of anyone matching his description. The truth crept in slowly, like ice water in her veins. Every Google search brought up more articles about romance scams, about people who had lost their life savings to fictional lovers, about the sophisticated criminal networks that operated these schemes. But even faced with mounting evidence, Mom couldn't let go completely. She told herself that David was different, that their connection was real, that there had to be an explanation. She created elaborate scenarios in her mind. David was in witness protection. David was working undercover. David had amnesia from his injuries. The final blow came when she reverse-searched one of David's photos and found it on a stock photography website. The man she had fallen in love with, the face she had memorized, the person she had trusted with her heart and her life savings, was a model named Marcus from Germany who had no idea his image was being used to steal from lonely women. That's when she called me. At 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, when the weight of her realization had become too heavy to bear alone. "I've done something terrible, honey. Something so stupid and I don't know what to do." I drove to her house in my pajamas, my heart pounding with fear and confusion. I found her in Dad's old study, surrounded by printouts of emails, bank statements, and Bitcoin transaction records. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and tears. "I've been scammed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've lost everything." The full scope of the disaster took hours to uncover. $2 million. Gone. Not just her savings, but her retirement accounts, her emergency fund, the equity in her home. The money she had set aside for her grandchildren's education, the cushion that was supposed to ensure her independence as she aged. All of it transferred to criminals who had never existed in the form she'd believed. "How could I have been so stupid?" she kept asking, her voice breaking. "I'm an accountant. I've seen these scams before. I know the warning signs. How could I have fallen for this?" The answer wasn't stupidity. It was loneliness, hope, and the fundamental human need for connection. The scammers had studied her, identified her vulnerabilities, and exploited them with surgical precision. They had offered her exactly what she needed most, not just love, but the feeling of being needed, valued, and central to someone's life. The weeks that followed were a blur of police reports, bank conversations, and legal consultations. We learned that the money was almost certainly unrecoverable. The Bitcoin transfers had been laundered through multiple accounts, the criminals were likely operating from overseas, and the sophisticated nature of the scam suggested an organized network with experience in covering their tracks. Mom aged years in those weeks. The vibrant, confident woman who had raised 3 children and built a successful business became fragile, uncertain, ashamed. She barely left the house, stopped answering the phone, and withdrew from the activities that had once brought her joy. The financial impact was devastating, but the emotional toll was worse. Mom had to grapple not just with the loss of her money, but with the loss of the love she had believed was real. She mourned David as if he had died, because in a way, he had. The man she had fallen in love with had never existed. "I keep thinking about all the things he said," she told me one afternoon as we sat in her kitchen. "All the promises he made, all the times he said he loved me. Was any of it real? Or was it all just calculated?" The truth was almost certainly that every word had been calculated, every emotion manufactured, every moment of apparent intimacy designed to extract more money. But that didn't make Mom's feelings any less real, or her pain any less valid. Recovery was slow and painful. Mom had to sell the house where she had raised her children, where she had built her life with Dad, where she had planned to grow old. She moved into a small apartment, her world suddenly constrained by financial necessity in a way it hadn't been in decades. But slowly, gradually, she began to rebuild. She started attending support groups for scam victims, where she met others who had lost money to similar schemes. She learned that she wasn't alone, that romance scams were a multi-billion-dollar industry that victimized thousands of people every year. "I'm not the first person to fall for this," she said one day, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "And I won't be the last. But maybe I can help other people avoid the same mistake." She began speaking publicly about her experience, sharing her story with senior centers, community groups, and anyone who would listen. She partnered with law enforcement to help educate others about the warning signs of romance scams. "I was intelligent, educated, and careful," she would tell audiences. "I thought I was too smart to fall for something like this. But these criminals are sophisticated, and they know exactly how to manipulate our emotions. Anyone can be a victim." Through her advocacy work, Mom has helped countless people recognize the warning signs of romance scams. She teaches them to watch for red flags, someone who declares love very quickly, who always has excuses for not meeting in person, who asks for money for emergency situations, who requests payment through untraceable methods. But more importantly, she talks about the emotional vulnerabilities that make people susceptible to these scams. Loneliness, grief, low self-esteem, and the desire for companionship can all be exploited by skilled manipulators. "The scammers don't just steal your money," she says. "They steal your ability to trust, your sense of safety, your faith in human goodness." Recovery isn't just about the financial loss. It's about learning to believe in yourself again. She has also become an advocate for better protection for seniors, working with banks and financial institutions to implement safeguards that might prevent large, unusual transfers. She supports legislation that would require waiting periods for significant financial transactions and mandatory warnings about common scam tactics. 3 years later, Mom is still recovering. She will never regain the financial security she once had, and she may never fully trust again in the way she once did. But she has found purpose in her pain, meaning in her loss. She lives simply now, in her small apartment, with a view of a community garden where she volunteers. She has rebuilt relationships with friends and family, though she still struggles with embarrassment about what happened. She has learned to be alone without being lonely, to find satisfaction in her own company. "I loved him," she tells me sometimes, speaking of David as if he were real. "I know that sounds crazy, but I did. I loved who I thought he was, and that love was real, even if he wasn't." The grief, she has learned, is legitimate. She was in a relationship, even if it was one-sided. She made plans, shared dreams, opened her heart. The fact that David was fictional doesn't make her feelings any less valid, or her loss any less real. If you've read this far, you might be wondering how to protect yourself or someone you love from a similar fate. The truth is that romance scams are becoming increasingly sophisticated, and they can target anyone at any age. Here are the warning signs that Mom wishes she had recognized. The person declares love unusually quickly, often within days or weeks of initial contact. Real relationships typically develop more gradually. They always have reasons why they can't meet in person or video chat. Common excuses include being deployed overseas, working on an oil rig, or caring for a sick relative. They ask for money, especially for emergencies. Legitimate romantic partners don't typically ask for financial help early in a relationship. They request payment through untraceable methods like wire transfers, gift cards, or cryptocurrency. These methods make it nearly impossible to recover stolen funds. Their photos appear too professional or polished, as if they were taken from a modeling portfolio. Reverse image searches can often reveal if photos have been stolen from other sources. They isolate you from friends and family, encouraging you to keep the relationship secret or claiming that others wouldn't understand. Their stories are inconsistent or overly dramatic. Scammers often can't keep their lies straight, especially when managing multiple victims. They refuse to speak on the phone, or their accent doesn't match their claimed background. Many romance scammers operate from countries where English is not the primary language. But beyond these tactical warnings,
Mom wants people to understand the emotional vulnerabilities that scammers exploit. If you're recently divorced, widowed, or going through a difficult time, you may be more susceptible to someone who offers understanding and companionship. If you're lonely, isolated, or feeling undervalued, you might be vulnerable to someone who makes you feel special and important. If you're struggling with self-esteem or feeling like your best years are behind you, you might be susceptible to someone who makes you feel attractive and worthy of love. These aren't character flaws, they're human needs that scammers ruthlessly exploit. My mother's story is not unique. Every year, thousands of people lose billions of dollars to romance scams. The victims are not foolish or gullible. They are human beings seeking connection in an increasingly disconnected world. The criminals who perpetrate these scams are skilled psychological manipulators who study their targets, learn their vulnerabilities, and exploit them with precision. They are not random opportunists, but professional criminals who have refined their techniques over years of practice. If you suspect that you or someone you know might be the target of a romance scam, please reach out for help. Contact your local police, the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, or organizations like AARP's Fraud Watch Network. Don't let shame or embarrassment prevent you from seeking assistance. And remember, falling for a romance scam doesn't make you stupid or weak. It makes you human. The capacity to love, to trust, to hope for companionship. These are not flaws to be ashamed of. They are fundamental human needs that should be protected, not exploited. Mom often says that the hardest part of her experience wasn't losing the money. It was learning to trust herself again. But she has learned, slowly and painfully, that her capacity for love is not a weakness. It's a strength that was stolen from her, but it's also a strength that can be reclaimed. I won't let them take.